Today we're looking at Jessica Wiskus, The Rhythm of Thought, Chapter 7, Harmony and the Movement of Style in Debussy. The opening quote to the chapter is, "Philosophy is nothing other than the unconcealment of the depth dimension of all other activities," by Merleau-Ponty in Husserl at the Limits of Phenomenology. By this time in the book, Wiskus has looked at depth as a power of temporality proper to the rhythmic and melodic sequence, as something that isn't fully present, isn't a thing in the world that we can touch and interact with, but it is a way that sort of hidden complexity and extra dimension is opened within the world as we experience it. And in music, we can say that the harmony and the rhythm are not just a collection of contents, beats and tones and pitches, but the harmony is actually dependent or determined by the sequence, its temporal unfolding, and the depth arises through these repetitions and variations that occur in time. The arabesque, which is the main theme of Debussy's Prelude to the Afternoon of a Faun, is not this sort of linear series or not even a kind of linear melodic gesture. Instead, it is a kind of folding over on itself, which doesn't just present us with an emotion or an idea, but instead it opens us to a world. It initiates us into a mystery. And we are going to look at the way that the harmony and the expressiveness of Debussy's Prelude relate to each other and how they uncover these phenomenological themes, especially that of depth and style, which Merleau-Ponty has presented and which Wiskus is fleshing out in a series of examples from art and music. Now, I'm not going to read the entire chapter because I'm a little bit worried about copyright infringements, but I'm going to read many sections from it and play you the musical examples. And yeah, again, the goal of the chapter is to connect the idea of depth and that of the melodic and harmonic expressiveness within Debussy's Prelude to show that the harmony itself expresses a certain style, and that will actually help us understand the idea of style. So the analysis begins by looking at the flute arabesque, and as I said, it is not this kind of linear melodic gesture, but rather it is this twisting and curving in on itself movement that instead of, expressing some sort of emotional content to us, instead it initiates a harmonic world, and this world is evoked by a relation between two tritones, your C sharp and your G, and your E and A sharp. The first tritone, the C sharp to G, is what the opening flute melody moves between. So it's really the first two long held out notes that we hear in the piece, and we hear it repeated because the arabesque repeats itself. And then the E and A sharp are heard within the horn response in measure 4, initiated by the harp arpeggio. So we get these two contrasting tritones, one within the flute part and then one within the response from the horn. These two tritones, as we'll see, create both contrasting tonalities as well as together forming a fully diminished seventh chord. And they break apart because each tritone is part of its own whole tone scale. Here's the first one. And then here's the second one. And those two whole tone scales are offset from each other. So we are getting both a division and a combination through the whole tone scale on the one hand and this fully diminished seventh chord on the other hand. Okay, so those are our two tritones, and that's how they are going to unfold and, well, Wiskus says this kaleidoscopic image where everything shifts and all of the parts now have a new sense, a new meaning. And this all turns around these two tritones. So our first tritone, which we find in our arabesque. And Wiskus points out that here in bar 3, with this note right there, that what we've done is resolve that tension by bringing the G up to a G sharp. But actually this G sharp initiates a new tritonal dissonance such that this final note of the melody does not end with resolution. Instead, it begins a new articulation through the dissonance of a new tritone, the E and A sharp. And just as the flute arabesque begins and ends by articulating this tritone melodically, in measure 4, the tritone comes to govern the harmony as well, now in the horn entrance on E against the A sharp taken over from the flute by the oboe. Immediately ensures that the tritone is sounded harmonically within the context here as an A sharp half diminished seventh chord. This chord maintains a close relationship in terms of intervallic content with the opening two tritones offered by the flute. The flute tritones, considered vertically, spell a fully diminished seventh chord with an ambiguous root of either C sharp, E, G, or A sharp. When the G natural of the fully diminished seventh chord is raised to become a G sharp, just as in measure 3 at the apex of the flute melody, an A sharp half diminished seventh chord is created. And so the transition between the implied harmony of the arabesque and the A sharp half diminished seventh chord in measure 4 is quite smooth. What then of the stunning B flat seventh chord that sounds on the downbeat of measure 5? This too is drawn through a close relationship with A sharp. The A sharp is spelled enharmonically as B flat, and G sharp is retained and spelled enharmonically as A flat. And the C sharp and E of the half diminished seventh chord move up by half steps, similar to the movement of G natural to G sharp, to become D and F. This harmony sounds momentarily like a kind of resolution because the E to A sharp tritone between the horn and the oboe respectively of the measure 4 has been dissolved through the movement of the horn to F and then B flat and A flat, and through the shift of the oboe's A sharp to a respelling of B flat in the strings. Each of these tritones is being resolved, but the resolution opens up as much tension as it closes, and it initiates a new level of expression, according to Wiskus, that each opens a unique problem, a unique tension with its own dimension of depth, and yet they are linked almost like an Escher drawing, where we seamlessly walk from one to the next. Both of these resolutions, they're very mild. They're not extreme strong resolutions. And on top of that, they shift us to a new tonal perspective, which immediately unfolds a new problem. Rather than getting us somewhere where we're now ready for a cadence or where we feel tonically centered, we are moved into a new displacement, a new sort of ambiguity and indeterminability. Wiskus says that the two tritones articulated in the flute melody form a sonority, a fully diminished seventh chord, that is ambiguous because it is symmetrical. It replicates itself, since each interval within the sonority divides into 3 half steps, just as the tritones themselves divide evenly in 6 half steps or 3 whole steps. Now, whereas the diminished chord and the whole tones that make up the tritone, the 3 tones for which it gets its name, both of these dissonant, tense musical harmonies, the diminished and the whole tone, they are quite different from each other. They use different notes, but they are both symmetrical. Each is symmetrical in its own way. The diminished because every step is a minor third, and the whole tone because every step is a whole tone. The fifth is asymmetrical, and therefore it is not included in either of these sonorities. The fifth has a linearity to it that gives us the authentic cadence. These tritones, which is present in both the whole tone scale and the diminished seventh chord, has a structural sonic symmetry that does not provide a sense of linear motion nor resolution within tonal context, but instead creates shift and flicker and replicates and doubles up. Melodically, tritones can be realized in 2 different ways. That is to say, they spawn 2 different pitch worlds, through symmetrical half steps or through symmetrical whole steps. Of the first way, we find many examples in the prelude, the saturation of half-step intervals in the opening measure of the flute melody, of course, but also in brief descending tail of the melody line in the violas and cellos introduced as counterpoint in measure 22. It's really interesting how Wiskus uses this term sonority, I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce it, but the sonorous, right? Instead of a tonality, right, which is the way that we talk about keys and modes and scales and things like that, here we have something that isn't tonal in that sense, but it has a kind of atmosphere to it. It has a kind of mood or orientation, or we can modulate to it even though it's not a key, right? Which is interesting. And we can think of it as a sonority or sonority or sonorous space. Space metaphorically in the qualitative sense, of course. The prelude makes use of the whole tone scale following measure 30 with this cadence, which we're about to hear right now. Which is again torn open into ambiguity here by the entrance of the whole tone scale. Here we're hearing it with the addition of these chromatic notes that we are hearing on the clarinets right here. And this is very reminiscent of the opening flute arabesque, but now we're moving between this major third, which is actually a diminished fourth. And it's almost as if the clarinet is coiling up from the one whole tone and getting back into a purely chromatic, almost, liquefying everything and turning it into what anything goes. And then it breaks from this in measure 32 as it now rises through another whole tone scale, but this is the other one from the first whole tone scale. Just to make this super clear, there are 12 notes, and if we select every other note, we have 6 notes, and there are 2 sets of these 6 notes, and neither of them share any notes with the other. Here I'm just switching back and forth between each of these whole tone scales. Basically, each of these upward movements then moves down by a semitone, and the whole structure is replayed over again, 1 semitone lower. So Debussy is taking this very tonally ambiguous thing, the whole tone scale, and making it even more ambiguous by lacing together these different whole tone scales intermittently, one and then the other. The relationship of this new melody in 31 is obvious with the original arabesque. The symmetry evoked through the half steps is clear. And what is interesting is that the clarinet inaugurates the other kind of symmetry, that of whole steps, in measure 32, to be confirmed immediately after by the flute. It is as if the tritones in the opening of the piece show themselves here to break into two sonic worlds, one of half steps, another of whole steps. Beneath this clarinet melody, the supporting harmony splits a French augmented sixth chord, a harmony that, like a fully diminished seventh chord, is built upon two tritones, but in such a way that the two tritones are not arranged three half steps or a minor third apart, like the fully diminished seventh chord, but interlocking through a whole step to imply a whole tone scale. The fully diminished seventh chord that marks out the beginning intertwining of tritones is also the axis on which the two whole tone scales interwave together. Here's the complete symmetrical structure as Wiskus lays it out. First, we have a French sixth chord, which implies the whole tone scale built on that scale degree. C. And then we have this fully diminished chord starting on B flat and the whole tone associated with it. And the French augmented sixth. This symmetry here points to an ambiguity of two possible directions that we can move from this fully diminished seventh chord out, spreading it open through two different whole tone scales and ending in these two different French augmented sixth chords. But in all of these harmonic relations, there is a kind of thread that is built by Debussy himself that isn't found simply in this symmetry. And it is only by this kind of movement from one area to the next by gradual movements. And this gradual movement in music is called common tones. A common tone is used to bridge certain movements and make them smoother. Wiskus very helpfully outlines all of these chords and explains that while they express the subtle movements that allow us to move from one completely different tonal area to another smoothly, right, because of the common tones, this linear motion, as it's shown here, is never actually heard within the piece. It's more of a conceptual way of understanding how these relate. So here, I'll play that now. The root of each of these chords, E flat, E, A sharp, C, G flat, D, and A flat, are all in the whole tone scale that relates back to the opening arabesque flute line. This establishes the general harmonic direction of the piece. This other harmonic area emerges not from the B flat E tritone, but from the C sharp G tritone, which connects the initial fully diminished chord and sets the piece in different directions. Here, the shifting tritone, their non-coincidence, generates a sense of motion, heard as a kind of undulating harmonic color. This harmony of depth that is expressed as movement, both within the B-flat A-sharp to E pitch collection and across the two collections. This harmony of depth structures the overall shape of the piece and especially illuminates the function of the beautiful extended melodic section of D flat major that begins in measure 55. This portion of the piece presents one of the few harmonic areas to be set up through a strong descending fifth relationship from measure 54 to 55, which has the effect of emphasizing its structural significance. It also features an unabashedly gorgeous melody, heard first in the woodwinds and then in the strings, over gently syncopated rhythms and lush orchestration. It is arguably the most extraordinary development of the piece, glorious and singing. But why D-flat major? What is it about the harmonic color that contributes to the exquisite expression of this music? Yet even in this glorious section of unabashed singing beauty, an internal tension is still operative, that of the unresolved conflict or energy that arises between G natural and G sharp, a non-coincidental root in the opening flute arabesque. The stability of the D-flat major section is called into question in two ways. In the first place, the D-flat major triad, the fifth of which is an A-flat, is undermined by the movement of the bass to G natural in measure 56, generating a melodic tritone. This movement is emphasized by the whole tone collection that sounds through the instruments of accompaniment in measures 56 and 58. A whole tone collection within A-flat has no position. And so the strength of the perfect fifth is undermined through the subversion of the A-flat. In the second place, measure 62, which connects the woodwind's initial melody in D-flat with the restatement in the violins at 63, features a D natural in the bass. Placing A-flat in another tritone relationship and featuring, as articulated in the upper woodwind voices, the other whole tone collection, that of B-flat, A-sharp, E. What this D major section as a whole discloses, therefore, is yet another sense in which the tension of tritones is unresolved. The piece is a kind of continual restating of this harmonic tension between the tritone and the whole tone scale divisions articulated by the diminished seven chord. How then does this music express a style? In the prelude, not only the opening arabesque, but also the two whole tone collections that govern the harmonic color or movement of the piece unfold according to a depth initiated through the two tritones, C sharp, G, and B flat or A sharp and E. Thus the melodic contour, the intervallic content of the chords, and the linear relationship among the harmonies are all oriented by the interval of the tritone. Yet, if, as it seems, there is a unitary motion or essence, i.e. that of the tritone, operating throughout the piece, nevertheless, it is a notion that does not exist outside of the piece, nor does it exist divested of the individual articulations of its musical character. For it is only through the performance of the whole of the prelude that anything like a style comes to be disclosed. In this sense, there is less an essence behind the piece than an opening of expressive possibility through which, in Debussy, the double realm of whole tone collections shines forth. Indeed, it could not be that we might simply hear the interval of a tritone in isolation, for example, C sharp and G, and equate this with the sinuous line and shades of Debussy's work. The harmony of a musical composition, like the rhythm, engages both prospectively and retrospectively across multiple sections of the piece. And so it is in all of the rich detail that the music speaks, as a timbre in the flute, a whole tone scale in the clarinet, a sweeping D-flat major melody in the violins, only in the specificity of the unfolding of time, only through the simultaneous decentering and recentering, that is to say, institution, do we come to understand musical harmony as an open and cohesive sense.